concrete, sedimentary rock. Cement is sedimentary rock. It only takes a little bit of time to form. No, it doesn't take millions of years for rocks to form. Here's a picture of sandstone. And again, our dig site, this is back in 2011 when we went, our dig site is all encompassing of sedimentary material, all waterborne. This is my hand working on what turned out to be a Tyrannosaurus finger bone. And if you'll note the black bone there, typically they're not. You'll see here how much lighter these are, more of a tan color. But apparently like the velociraptors, the T-Rexes, whatever it was in their composition, how it interacted with the soil, the bones often turned out black. And so I was a happy little camper to pull a T-Rex finger bone out of the ground. I didn't get to keep it though. It went to the museum. Yes, Doug.
You may get to this in a minute, but you talked about your first site and second site. How do you determine where you start digging?
Yes, let me come to that. Yeah, I'll be glad to tell you that. One of the key things to keep in mind with fossilization is it requires rapid burial. Now, if you remember last week, we talked about uniformitarianism, that Charles Lyell said that what's going on today has been the only thing that's ever been going on. And so when he goes back, he sees no specific or unique events. But you know what? We're not finding bones being buried and fossilized today. That the bones are being dug out of the ground actually date back to rock formations that would go back to the time of the Genesis flood. That this is not a process that's going on. In fact, if you think about roadkill today, or an animal that dies, the process of scavengers eating its flesh, bacteria coming in and decaying it, these animals don't last. And so you need an event of rapid burial for the dinosaur bones to actually even be preserved in the first place. Now this is at our site, this is in our area in Montana, and I point this out to you is, first of all, is there's a little bit of stratification you might be able to pick out. Should have brought my laser pointer here. But you'll see here the layers here. And what I want you to see here is that as the Genesis flood would have worked and churned up the soil and began to lay the sediment back out, that the water and dirt would have come up to a particular level. And within all that, you've got this stratified layer laying the bones and dirt and rock out. And as the floodwaters begin to recede, it creates runoff and creates canyons. And so here's the canyon. And then we have subsequently what is called, where we have erosion, which would be a vertical process. Now, why do I point this out to you? When I try to answer Doug's question, when you come across a dinosaur bone, say you've got a skeleton here. That skeleton has been buried underground since the Genesis flood in a horizontal fashion. It's undergone whatever decay or fossilization that has occurred to it. But you don't know when it's going to be exposed, because when we're walking around, we don't know where the bones are exactly. And so what we're looking for when we're walking around is, if we were to have this face of dirt and rock right here, I'm not so much looking at this wall right here, I'm looking at the floor. Because what I'm looking for is, if a bone has gotten exposed because of erosion, it will start to crumble and break off and wash down to the floor here. And you'll see this individual, it's called float. And so if I find little bits of bone here on the ground, then I in turn look up and see if I can see bones sticking out. And so part of it, to answer your question, Doug, is I know the areas where the formations are, what dinosaur bone is, but part of it's just a process of discovery. Part of it's just walking around, catching areas, looking for these little bitty pieces of dinosaur bone that we call float. And so it's a lot of just trial and error. What we do is, when we were out in Montana, after we had a big rain, we'd drive a couple of days later, we would walk the property. Because what had happened is, new bits of sediment would have been washed down, and something that might not have, last week might not have been exposed, this week might have become exposed. All right, bone beds. Just a couple of things here, looking at this, mass burial, intense burial, and rapid burial. Here we have 100 Psittacosaurus skeletons are found according to this article, which gives us the indication of a mass burial. If you've ever been to Dinosaur, Colorado, Dinosaur National Monument, again, it's about the size of 2 basketball floors. They put a building over it. There's dozens of dinosaur fossils all right there, jumbled in together. Here is up in Canada, a mega dinosaur bone bed. If this is the right one, I'm thinking Centrosaur skeletons, which Centrosaur is like a Triceratops. There's supposed to be an estimate of over 1,000 skeletons, not 1,000 bones, but parts of over 1,000 skeletons in this one geographical area. Here's some details on it. Nearly 1.5 square miles, contains the remains of thousands of Centrosaur skeletons. Evidence these dinosaurs were not drowned but buried in a massive storm. And what storm would do this? Again, the Genesis flood answers these questions when we encounter these ideas here. Here's a dinosaur herd where carcasses had decomposed after being buried, not before. Here's another example of rapid burial. This is up in northern Montana. Leonardo. Now Leonardo is interesting as this is the top of his head right here, and you're looking down at his neck, and you see another picture of him right here. He actually has some of his skin was fossilized and remained. Some of his internal organs actually were fossilized and remained. It says his fossilized skeleton is covered in soft tissue, skin, scales, muscle, fat pad, foot pads, and even his last meal is in his stomach. And so this again points to a rapid burial of this particular animal. Jack Horner, just talking about in his book Digging for Dinosaurs of this one particular site, says we had discovered the tomb of 10,000 dinosaurs, which talks about a mass burial. I guess let me stop right here. What your dinosaur books are going to typically say, if any of your children have dinosaur books, what they're going to give you a picture of is a dinosaur dying close to a river, and over time he's going to slowly have his skeleton buried and it'll be fossilized. And so the picture here is that we typically are seeing is that dinosaurs and that burial process takes a long time. And my point with these bone beds is that I don't think we had 10,000 dinosaurs walk to the river's edge all at one time and lay down and die and get buried slowly. This sounds like something huge happened to them all at once. Dr. Horner goes on to say, this was no ordinary spring flood from one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation. That's our best explanation. It seems to make the most sense, and on the basis of it, we believe that this was a living, breathing group of dinosaurs destroyed in one catastrophic moment. Let me remind you, Jack Horner is an evolutionist. I don't know that there's a much better explanation of the Genesis flood right here.
Amen.
And so what you find is when these people are really honest with the evidence that they're seeing, what they're seeing here is they're seeing something catastrophic with water happening to these animals, something unique. This slow, gradual, millions of years idea is just not logical. Again, just a point here, evolution's not in the fossil record. The fossil record does not give evidence of evolution. That what fossils are pulled out of the ground are actually fully formed, functional, living animals. As we talked last week about the Cambrian explosion, that they talked about the Cambrian explosion, recognizing that there was no predecessor or ancestor that surrounded these animals, that they were fully functional creatures. So what we see in these bone beds is mass burial, intense burial, and a rapid burial. Genesis 7:11 says, the fountains of the great deep broke open and the windows of heaven were opened. Now there's been some creation scientists, some geologists who have built some models about what this verse might mean in light of the evidence that we see. And so, when we look at the world, well, if I could just back up just a second, I think it was World War II, the sonar technology was being developed. After the war was over, they continued with that technology and ultimately wound up mapping the ocean floor. One of the key things that I thought was really interesting is this blue, dark blue line right down the middle here of the Atlantic. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It follows in contour very nicely with the continents on either side of it. See, it is believed, it was first established by a gentleman named Stillman, I believe it was, in the late 1800s, that the Earth's continents were actually one mass at one point in the past, original creation. It's called Pangea. Now, some believe that slow, gradual processes have pushed these continents apart. But I believe that that mechanism is really not sufficient to get large land masses to move. But think about the Genesis flood and the forces that were going on here. In fact, as I just read, Genesis 7:11 says, the fountains of the deep burst forth. Something under the earth's crust came through and pushed these continents apart. And I believe this Mid-Atlantic Ridge is evidence of where these continents would have connected, and likely evidence of where one of these spots would have come through and broken through the Earth's crust. You see this next, I've got a next, I'll just let you watch and I'll explain it. Now, this series of slides here is meant to demonstrate that at the onset of the Genesis flood, you would have had a few things going on. First of all, the fountains of the deep, as you saw the force coming up from the Earth's crust, would have broken through the Earth's crust and begin to push the land masses apart. Would have also created uplift. Well, we know today that it doesn't take much of an uplift in the ocean for a tidal wave to form. So imagine that occurring all over the planet on a scale that's probably difficult to describe. Also think about this material. See, I believe this is where the volcanoes began, was right here at the Genesis flood. And so you've got this hot material hitting water, and this model that I believe it's Dr. John Baumgartner developed believes that when this hot material hit the ocean water, it vaporized it and created this steam column that went up into the Earth's atmosphere. And as it began to cool, it began to turn back to the earth in rain. And so this was what was going on at the onset of the Genesis flood. Not just 40 days of rain, but forces working under the earth's crust, completely reshaping the face of the planet, completely. And so it is incredible, and it's even difficult to even describe all that went on here. Do you have any questions about this?
Wouldn't also the high concentrations of sulfur gas have killed the dinosaurs even if the water didn't?
I would say the sulfur gas probably was lower down on their worry list.
Yeah.
When you've got potentially 100-foot tall waves of water. Again, I forgot about your DVD. Okay, we'll do that in a few weeks. Okay. But this is that.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
So it's kind of like the crust of the earth was floating in all this water. Is that kind of the picture that was displaying?
There was pockets of water underneath the Earth's crust, but I would say it would be more than just water that was bursting through here. That I believe a lot of the rain that fell back to the Earth might have been ocean water itself that had been vaporized. Now, I believe we talked last week that there are currently today, there's enough water molecules trapped in the rock under the Earth's surface today to cover the entire planet right now. So, you ask, where did the water come from and where did it go? Well, where did it come from? It came from under the Earth's surface. Where did it go? Well, we have probably 70% of our planets covered by water today. I'd say a lot of the water is still visible today that wasn't visible pre-flood. Somebody else over here going to say something?
Yeah,
sir.
so the Earth's surface area was the same in that scenario, but when the separation of the continents occurred,
Mhm.
the landmass just spread out from each other, separating the continents, and basically was filled in by what it would have normally filled in my backyard with water, because the water burst forth but covered that landmass
Right.
that had previously been.
You got a landmass that would have set over top of all there.
Yeah, so they would have, so let's say in that example, all those continents are touching each other, but then the rest of it is water.
Yes.
Okay. So as that separation occurs, water is coming forth, and they're just basically just spreading out.
Spreading out. And at the same time, you've got water washing over these continents as well.
Right, because it's like a tsunami.
It's like a tsunami, exactly. So we even see this in some of our rock layers, that you'll see certain zones of rock. And so you can see where this, you've got sandstone. When it's out west, sandstone's the key thing, but where did all the sand come from? I'd say it came from the ocean. And that was part of sweeping across the continent. And so in addition to shifting the continents, it would have also stripped the top of the continents off and redeposited all that sediment. Yes, Mom?
You mentioned about how rocks can be formed quickly. If anybody's ever seen the damage a flood can do inside of like a business or a residence, the water goes in, but a couple of days later you find mud that is just caked on the bottom. And if you don't get that out soon, the next couple of days, it's hard as rock. And that doesn't take long at all. If you're talking about a couple thousand years, I mean, yeah, it is going to be rock.
And so as you come towards the end of the flood, as everything starts to settle down, the sediment would start to settle in, but you've still got water and all that pressure from the water.
Correct.
It would eventually begin to recede back into its crevices. You've got canyons, caves all over the planet. I believe those caves were actually points in which water would have returned back into the Earth's surface as well. So, good questions.
What about ice? When the ice had tremendous millions of pounds being pressing down on all that rock.
It is believed that within 500 years after the flood actually would have triggered the ice age. That you've got warm ocean waters because of the volcanic material. You've got the cloud cover, but you've also got all the ash. Is anybody familiar with the Ring of Fire out in the Pacific Ocean? You ever heard that term?
Yes.
I mean, you go all the way down from the tip of South America, all the way up through North America, across the top, down around to the Philippines, and all the way over towards Australia. That's just lined with volcanoes. Now, if all those volcanoes were triggered at the Genesis flood, which I believe they were, you've got all that ash, and so you've got warm water and cool air, and it creates an environment where you're going to have temperatures going to cool, and eventually this would have been what triggered the ice age. And so the ice sheets begin to make their way down to North America. And so you talk about all the weight they have. See, that would have been an additional event that's beyond what I'm even talking about with the Genesis flood itself. You've got this ice age and all these glaciers are coming down and they're just grinding up the Earth's surface during that time period. So you've got several really key geological features that are going on to shape the face of the planet. Continents being shifted, sediment being stripped off the top, redeposited, water runoff creating canyons, glaciers. I mean, you've got these handful of things that shape the entire planet.
And none of it by chance.
And none of it by chance. And all because of one reason.
Sin.
Sin of humanity. Judgment upon sin of humanity.
Where would the ice age have fallen chronologically?
It would have been within 500 years of the flood, and if I remember reading, it probably would not have lasted more than 500 years. But my perspective is a little bit different on that. I think we're still in the ice age from the standpoint is that we have polar ice caps that I don't believe existed prior to the flood. And so in some respects, we still have remnants of the ice age even still today. There are dinosaur fossils found above the Arctic Circle even green plants in the fossil record, which indicates there